Lisa Newburger. Life and Death, a Teachable Experience. Life and Death, a Teachable Experience, Lisa Newburger.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and honored guests, special people come into your life at all different times. In 4th grade, there was my favorite teacher, Miss McCauley. All the boys had a crush on her. In college, there was Zeus Yamianis. He motivated me to exercise. The fact that he was built like a Greek god did not impede my motivation one bit. As a result, I've been exercising for the past 20 years, even though I hate to. The most important teacher, though, was a patient of mine. We'll call him Jim. Jim taught me how fragile life really is. We met when we were both 29. He was a patient of mine in a nursing facility where I was a social worker. He was paralyzed from the neck down and on a ventilator. When he was 21, he dove into a swimming pool and broke his neck. Since then, he had been living at our facility. And everybody loved him. Why? Because he was just a great guy. He'd tell jokes, help people out whenever he could. It was just fun to be around. He'd get up in his wheelchair for about 12 hours a day. And he could get around the facility using a joystick in his chin. The vent would go in the back. He also had a computer in his room that he used. But to be honest, I don't remember exactly how he was able to activate it, other than the fact that he did use it. But getting him out of bed was a major feat. It took 6 of us to physically lift him out of the bed to transfer him to the chair. Now, the facility could have required for him to use a mechanical lift, but he was afraid of being dropped. He felt safer with our hands on him. Even though he couldn't feel them, he could see us. If they had trouble hustling up a 6th person, they'd recruit me. And they always gave me his head. I never realized how heavy a head could be. So picture this. The 6 of us would circle his bed, a nurse would climb into bed with him, crouch down, and on the count of 6, we would transfer him to the chair. This was not good back safety techniques. But nobody ever complained. Why? Because he was just a great guy. How'd he get to be my teacher? When I was first assigned to the ventilator unit, I was petrified. I am not a doctor like my sister or father. I get queasy with some of the things that they get to see. Machines with alarms, tubing going in someone, and a hole in one's neck. And what if that person popped off the vent and I was the only person around? Being the inquisitive one that I am, I set up multiple trainings, and Jim agreed to help us. Keep in mind one thing. Jim was our most critical patient. If he pops off the ventilator, he has 2 minutes tops before it becomes a life and death situation. Other patients, they can be off overnight or for periods of time, and it's not as critical. But if we heard a page overhead saying respiratory stat to Jim's room, we all went running. The day of the training arrived. I was a bit nervous. There were 6 of us, and we met in Jim's room at 10 a.m., and this included the respiratory therapist and Jim. Since I had set up the training, they asked me to be the first person trained. Great. So the respiratory therapist gave us our instructions. We would take this mask, put it over Jim's nose and mouth. It was attached to a blue bag. We would squeeze the bag, which would force room air to inflate his lungs. The body would naturally expel it on its own, even if you're paralyzed. I nervously start walking towards Jim. The respiratory therapist looks at me and says, "What? You're not going to kill him?" That was really helpful. I get to Jim's bedside, and he looks up at me and he says, "Lisa, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be all right." I take the mask and put it over his nose and mouth, and abruptly the vent is turned off. There is this eerie, spooky silence in the room. I start to squeeze a bag. Am I doing this right? Unless something went wrong, they would put him back in the vent, right? People slowly start talking behind me. I look down at Jim and see how he's doing. Suddenly, his eyes roll to the back of his head. No one's responding. I turn to the respiratory therapist and I stammer, is he okay? The respiratory therapist walks over and looks at Jim. He says, oh my God, Lisa, what'd you do to him? At this point, the room is spinning. I am drenched in perspiration. I don't know if I'm going to be upright much longer. And not knowing what to do, I look at Jim, and what do I see? I see Jim laughing at me, hysterically. He thought this was the funniest practical joke he had ever played. At first, I was relieved that he was okay. Then I wanted to kill him. I wanted to throttle his little neck. That was a teachable moment. I held a man's life in my hands. I don't ever want to do that again. The point is this. Teachers and mentors come into your life at all different times. Ask questions. Take advantage of them. You have no idea where it will lead to. And remember Jim. He taught me how fragile life is. That you dive into a swimming pool, you may not be climbing back out of it. Not only was he a great guy, he was a great teacher. One I will never forget. Mr. Toastmaster.